A High Court in Pretoria has set aside former President Jacob Zuma's medical parole, which means he must go back to prison. The court found that former Correctional Services Commissioner Fraser's move was unlawful. The department's been ordered to take Zuma back into custody so he can resume his 15-month sentence. His time spent on parole will not be counted as part of his time served. eNCA's Siphamandla Goge has more on this story. Good afternoon, Siphamandla. You spoke to Correctional Services spokesperson a bit earlier. Are you getting a sense that they will in fact appeal this judgment?
Difficult to tell for now, but we are getting a sense that they are under pressure. They don't have time in terms of deciding what to do next, because if they do not take a decision and communicate it, then they will be in contempt of court. There is a judgment that has been handed down by the High Court. They need to decide what happens next. It's not that they don't know what to do, really. There are two options. It's either they decide to appeal that, which will buy them more time, and the former president will not be expected to report to the next correctional services center or correctional facility. We know that he spent some time in Escort Correctional Facility. If they decide not to appeal, they will have to take him back to prison, and those are the two options that they've got, really. It's not that difficult for them to decide, but I guess what they are busy doing right now, which is the right thing to do, by the way, it's to be expected. The judgment was handed down this morning. They need to go through that judgment, study that judgment, and establish what were the reasons for the judge to decide that the placing of former president on medical parole was unlawful. Now, that will give them enough grounds and reasons to decide to appeal, because if they decide to appeal, they would need to say on what grounds are they deciding to appeal that decision or that judgment. So in order for them to establish those grounds, they would need to study the judgment carefully, look for loopholes, and then decide on the basis of those grounds that they will appeal. If they decide not to appeal, they will have to act and take the former president back to jail. Now, they don't have time in terms of deciding. Their legal team will have to advise the national leadership of the National Department of Correctional Services to say what needs to happen next. And Singabako Ngumalo is understanding of the fact that they don't have time, and their legal team is studying the judgment. This is what he told us a few minutes ago.
We only received the judgment today. We are very busy studying that particular judgment, and at the right time we'll then pronounce in terms of our action moving forward. But for now, our legal fundis are studying that judgment, dissecting each and every statement and phrase in it.
And then in terms of capacity, Siphamandla, you know, if we remember correctly, what they stated were the grounds for his release on medical parole, that's the former president. It's that they had in fact established that the nature of his ailment or his condition warranted his release, because they felt they didn't have the capacity to care for him in that state. So when you spoke to Ngabako about that issue of capacity, what did he have to say? Are they in a position to take care of him with whatever condition he has at this point?
Well, they are trying to avoid that question for now, because they are saying it's preempting that they will be taking him back to prison, yet they have not decided. But they are on record previously as saying that he needs to get external medical care. That's why he was released from prison, by the way, to go to Pretoria to seek some medical attention, because they said they didn't have enough capacity at the time to deal with his ailment back then. So I guess nothing has changed. But I did ask him that question to say, are you ready to take him back? Are all your facilities ready to welcome him? In any event, it would be one of the facilities in KwaZulu-Natal. We know that he was incarcerated and sent to Escort prison, which is not very far from eNCA. And then there were also reports before that he was going to be sent to one of the maximum prisons here in KwaZulu-Natal, and that is Westville in Durban. So across the province, Singabako is of the view that they've got the capacity to welcome him back inside. But as for looking after him medically, I guess it's something that we'll have to try and probe further, because in the past they have said that they don't have capacity to deal with that and to handle that. And also, remember, the decision to place the former president on medical parole was Fraser's decision. There were reports that he decided to ignore the advice of the parole board. In terms of the law and the act, he was empowered, he can take any decision. But I guess here the argument was the issue of procedure, to say, yes, you are cutting the corners. And many people raised those questions to say, but in terms of procedure, you seem to be flouting the procedure. You have the powers and the right and the authority to place anyone on medical parole based on medical advice that you get from the medical team, but also there is a parole board that needs to advise you and at least to give you a clear indication what to do moving forward. So many people who were saying Arthur Fraser appeared to have rushed the decision on the eve of his departure. I remember in Pietermaritzburg when he attended former President Jacob Zuma's court case appearance, I did ask him to say, are you 100% certain that should your decision be challenged, it will not be set aside? He said, well, people have a right to go to court to challenge the decision. It will be ventilated in court. But he was adamant and hopeful that he took the right decision back then.
But Siphamandla, the role of the centre head, escort centre head in all of this. I remember quite vividly, Arthur Fraser did state that he was in fact given a briefing on what the centre could and could not do insofar as the former president's medical condition or care is concerned. So he has always somehow included the centre head to state that, yes, in as much as the centre head could have made that decision to release him on parole, I withdrew those delegations and I made the decision myself, but after consultation, nevertheless, with the centre head as to the problem they were seized with. So are we removing the centre head at this point, or the centre head is very much a part of this conversation and possibly would also to a certain extent have to perhaps consult with Arthur Fraser right now on documentation that, yes, in fact, it was me that recommended or advised that we're not in a position to handle the former president's medical care?
There's no way you can remove the centre head. She's the one who was dealing with the matter. But the tricky part here is that she reports, or she reported to Arthur Fraser back then. So even though the decision was Arthur Fraser's decision, because the centre head could only report to her boss, and at the time her boss was Arthur Fraser, at the end of the day that decision lies with Arthur Fraser. He's the one who had to sign off, despite what he may have been given or may have been briefed about former President Jacob Zuma's medical records and medical situation at the time. So simply put, from the correctional facility itself, from the centre, you cannot remove or divorce the centre head from this. But at the end of the day, the centre head had to defer or refer upwards to her boss, and her boss at the time was Arthur Fraser. And Arthur Fraser is on record as owning the decision, saying, yes, despite all the advices that were there and the reports that I was given, I took a decision based on what I considered to be the best interest of the inmate at the time who was unwell. I decided to place him on medical parole. But be that as it may, the entire correctional services structure, from the centre head to the national commissioner or the former national commissioner, those are the people who took a decision.